Have you ever wondered about the course of events that led to the most catastrophic accident in aviation history? This cataclysmic event ended with 583 people dead and 2 aircraft demolished beyond recognition. Firemen were working tirelessly for 12 hours trying to put out the flames, but all to no avail. With the news spreading across the globe, everyone kept asking the same questions. How could this happen? How could 2 aircraft possibly be on the same runway at the same time? What had gone wrong and who is to blame? But before we delve any further, please make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment below to let us know you've booked a seat for our adventure. The year is 1977. In the heart of the aviation boom, the Boeing 747, an iconic symbol of the jet age, reigned supreme. Airlines were expanding and the world was quickly becoming a smaller place. Amidst this intense transformation, Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747, was preparing for a routine transatlantic journey. Little did anyone know, this flight was far from ordinary. It was destined to etch a tragic mark in aviation history. Pan Am Flight 1736 was en route from Los Angeles to Gran Canaria with an immediate stop at New York. The jumbo jet was renamed Clipper Young America. In its first year of service, N736PA also became the first 747 to be hijacked when it was flown to Cuba on August 2, 1970. Following this incident, the aircraft's name was changed back to Clipper Victor. On March 27, 1977, Clipper Victor made history in the Tenerife disaster. Clipper Victor was packed with holidaymakers, business travelers, and all the individuals excited to traverse the Atlantic. The majority were elderly passengers who were supposed to get onto a cruise ship when they reached Las Palmas. Las Palmas is the capital of the Canary Islands and is situated on Gran Canaria, which is one of the 8 main islands of the island group. In command of Pan Am Flight 1736 was 56-year-old Captain Victor Grubbs, a seasoned pilot with a reputation for his calm demeanor and precision. He made a total flying time of 21,043 hours and a flying time of 564 hours on B747. Assisting him was 38-year-old First Officer Robert Bragg with a total flying hour of 10,800 hours and 2,796 hours on B747. Joining them in the cockpit was 46-year-old flight engineer George Warnes with a total flying hour of 15,210 hours and 559 hours on the B747. This was a very experienced flight crew. They took over the flight in New York heading towards Las Palmas. When the aircraft arrived in New York, it was already delayed for 45 minutes, which meant that the whole flight towards Las Palmas also became delayed for 45 minutes. At 0742, Flight 1736 took off from JFK International Airport with a total of 16 crew members and 380 passengers and started crossing the Atlantic towards Las Palmas. While the Pan Am aircraft was on its route to Gran Canarias Airport, another B747 KLM Flight 4805 was getting ready to depart from Amsterdam down towards Las Palmas Airport. This was a short flight organized by Holland International Travel Group. In the cockpit, a 50-year-old Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zatten was working as a chief flight instructor on the Boeing 747 fleet for KLM. At that time, he had made an accumulative 11,700 total flying hours and 1,545 flying hours on Boeing 747. Assisting him in the first officer seat was 42 years old Klaus Mayers. Klaus Mayers was born in Opendorp, the Netherlands. Until the day of his death, he had a total of 9,200 flying hours, 95 of them on a Boeing 747. Finally joining both these men was flight engineer Willem Schrouder, with 17,031 total flying hours and 543 flying hours on the B747. He was a highly skilled engineer. At 9 a.m., KLM Flight 4805 took off from Schiphol Amsterdam International Airport with 14 crew members and 243 passengers on board and started its travel down towards Las Palmas. Despite the seemingly ordinary nature of the two flights, a series of unfortunate events were about to unfold. A sudden bomb explosion at the Las Palmas airport by a group called MPAIAC forced the airport to close its runway to let the authorities search for more potential bombs. Both Pan Am Flight 1736 and KLM Flight 4805 had to divert to the Los Rodeos airport in Tenerife. This diversion set the stage for a catastrophic collision between Boeing 747 and KLM Flight 4805. The Tenerife airport, not designed to handle the influx of diverted jumbo jets, became a chaotic maze of taxiing aircraft, complicating matters further. At 38 minutes after 1 in the afternoon, KLM Flight 4805 touched down on runway 30 in Los Rodeos Airport. They taxied up close to the terminal building as far north as they could on the apron, and they parked there. At 15 minutes after 2 in the afternoon, just 37 minutes after the KLM aircraft landed, Pan Am Flight 1736 also taxied to the same apron. With this, the stage was set for disaster. Due to the airport location, which is 2,000 feet above sea level, plus a nearby volcano called Pico del Teide, what was created was a tropical and subtropical weather inside the airport vicinity. This created a dense fog. The fog descended onto the airport, reducing visibility to almost zero. This fog, combined with a series of miscommunications and misunderstandings, would lead to the most devastating accident in aviation history. It was a day marked by a series of unfortunate events, a day that began like any other but would end in tragedy. The weather conditions were far from ideal. A thick fog rolled in, reducing visibility to almost zero. The airport, Los Rodeos, now known as Tenerife North Airport, was not equipped to handle the volume of air traffic it found itself burdened with that day due to all the flights diverted from Las Palmas Airport. In addition, Los Rodeos Airport had a very poor safety record. Between 1965 and 1968, there was on average 1 crash per year in the airport and its surroundings. These crashes claiming 98 lives. In an effort to fix abysmal safety record, a decision was made to build a new airport in the south part of Tenerife, where the weather was much better and with much more navigation equipment installed. But unfortunately, as things always are, this plan failed due to incessant political infighting. The airport was in a state of panicked chaos. The diversion of several transatlantic flights, including Pan Am Flight 1736 and KLM Flight 4805, due to a bomb explosion at their intended destination, Las Palmas Airport, disrupted the normal flow of operations. The airport was not designed to accommodate the likes of the Boeing 747s, the queen of the skies, let alone 2 of them at the same time. The pilots of both planes were seasoned professionals. In the KLM cockpit was Captain Jacob Valhuisen van Zetten, KLM's top 747 instructor pilot. His experience was matched by the Pan Am crew led by Captain Victor Grubbs, a veteran with over 21,000 flight hours, yet neither crew could foresee the calamity that lay ahead. In the KLM cockpit, Captain Jacob Valhuisen van Zetten and his crew wanted all the passengers to stay on board, as he thought this would be a short ground delay and that they could depart towards Las Palmas Airport. But after 20 minutes, the passengers became more in need of a quick rest to stretch their legs and grab a drink or so off the aircraft. Captain Van Zetten decided that the passengers could disembark and go into the terminal building for a quick rest time, and this is where Captain Van Zetten takes a decision that's going to have dire consequences. He decides that in order not to lose this ground delay time, he could take in as much fuel as he needed to fly over to Las Palmas and back to Amsterdam to minimize the ground delay which will be taken in Las Palmas Airport. And to be more clear, the refueling process, especially for Boeing 747, is a big operation due to its big tanks. Also due to fuel weight, the overall weight of the aircraft would increase by 15%, which means Captain Van Zetten would need higher speed and longer takeoff distance to take off safely. On the other hand, the Pan Am aircraft that came a little bit later wanted to do the same, but were told the terminal building was fully closed due to the KLM passengers. But the crew asked for steps to be brought up so that the passengers could stretch their legs a little bit and get some fresh air. After a short time, Captain Van Zatten, the KLM captain, received a message from the tower informing him that the Las Palmas had just reopened once again. At the same time, Captain Victor Grubbs, the Pan Am captain, had also received the same message, and he asked for a startup, but the tower relayed back that the KLM flight is refueling, and there is not enough ground clearance to pass the KLM and enter the runway. Captain Victor Grubbs, the Pan Am captain, was not happy with this. At 16:45, the KLM aircraft had finished refueling. Captain Van Zatten, the KLM captain, and his crew were now trying to complete their checklist. At 16:56, the KLM crew started the first engine, and they were now ready to taxi. The approach controller cleared them to enter runway 12 and then exit the runway on the third exit C3 on their left-hand side. The KLM First Officer Klaas Meyers received the messages and replied back, and instead of confirming the third exit, he read back the first exit. When the approach controller heard the readback, he changed the instructions to just backtrack all the runway 12 until you reach the end of the runway, make a 180 degrees turn, and then to hold position for further instructions. As the KLM aircraft started to taxi, the visibility was indicated to be around 500 meters or less, which was very poor visibility. At the same time, as the KLM aircraft nearly reached the end of the runway and started to turn 180 degrees, the Pan Am Flight 1736 received their startup clearance. After a short period, they started up all the 4 engines and they requested the taxi clearance. As the cockpit voice recorder indicates, Captain Victor Grubbs made his intentions to his first officer that the best thing to do would be to stay off the runway and to wait for the KLM aircraft to take off, instead of being back-to-back with them. But unfortunately, this never happened due to time and pressure stress on the crew. At 5:02, Pan Am is instructed to follow KLM onto the runway and take the third exit, which was too narrow an exit for an aircraft as big as B747. The crew were forced to make a very steep 148-degree turn to the left, which is needed to make a proper turn into the exit C3. They were then to make a further 148 degrees to the right, just to be on the runway. At 5:03, the Pan Am First Officer came onto the frequency and asked the controller, "Confirm, we are taxi off on the third exit?" The controller replied back, "Affirm, taxi off on the third exit, 1, 2, 3, third." As the Pan Am aircraft continued to taxi, the cockpit voice recorder indicates that the pilots looked out to see the taxiways as they passed. They called out things like, "There is one, there is the second," but there was no mention of the third one, which is what they were cleared to taxi off on. The reason for this might have been due to heavy fog or a lack of concentration. As the fog thickened and visibility dropped, the pilots strained their eyes for any sign of each other. Their ears tuned to the crackling voices coming through their headsets. The tension in both cockpits was palpable. A ticking time bomb was waiting to explode. 2,000 meters away from the Pan Am aircraft at the very end of the runway, the KLM 8504 has now completed a 180 turnaround and is ready for takeoff clearance. First Officer Mules asks for takeoff clearance and says, "KLM 8504, we are ready for takeoff and we are waiting for ATC clearance." The controller responded, "KLM 8705, which was the wrong call sign. You are cleared to Papa Beacon climb to maintain a flight level 90, right turn after takeoff to proceed on heading 040 degrees to intercept radio 325 radial from Las Palmas, VOR." This was an en route clearance, not takeoff clearance. Captain Van Zatten thinks now that the runway is completely clear, and this clearance for takeoff, an en route clearance, he responded with a "yeah." In the KLM cockpit, a series of miscommunications led to a fatal misunderstanding. Believing they had clearance for takeoff, the KLM 747 began barreling down the runway. Simultaneously, the Pan Am aircraft, lost in the fog and still on the same runway, was desperately trying to clear the path. At time 5:06 and 11 seconds, First Officer read back the ATC clearance and added, "We are now at taking off." The controller understands that the KLM aircraft is now at the takeoff position, and he responds, "Okay, stand by for takeoff, I will call you." At exactly the same time, both KLM First Officer and Pan Am First Officer made a communication to the ATC. KLM First Officer, "We are at takeoff." Pan Am First Officer, "We are still taxiing on the runway Clipper 1736. The problem is that those two messages, when they are being transmitted at the same time, causes interference in the frequency. So the only thing heard in the KLM cockpit was "okay" from the controller. At 5:06, the flight engineer Schroeder in the KLM cockpit says, "So are they not clear of the runway then?" Captain Van Zatten responded, "What did you say?" Schroeder responds, "So is he not clear of the runway then, the Pan Am?" Captain Van Zatten responds in a very convincing voice, "Oh yes." In the Pan Am cockpit, the pilots have now passed the third exit, which was supposed to exit from. 5:06 and 38 seconds, Captain Grubbs is looking out through his windshield and starts to see the headlights of the KLM aircraft. Initially, he thinks that the aircraft is standing still, waiting for them to enter the exit to continue their takeoff clearance, but in a very short time, he realizes that this is not a standing aircraft, and he shouts, "Oh God! God damn it! That son of a bitch is coming! He's coming!" His first officer responds, "Get off! Get off!" Captain Grubbs' hearse gives a full tiller to the left and puts a full thrust, but due to heavy aircraft weight, the maximum speed the aircraft reached was only 20 knots. At the KLM cockpit, Captain Van Zatten tries to pull his yoke all the way back, causing a tail strike for about 20 meters mark on the runway asphalt. The last words Captain Van Zatten says is, "Oh, Godverdamme." The sheer force of the impact, the deafening sound of rending metal, and the terrifying eruption of fire painted a scene of chaos and disaster. Suddenly, the peaceful night was shattered. The Pan Am Flight 1736 and the KLM 747, two giants of the sky, met in a cataclysmic clash. The KLM 747 at full takeoff speed rammed into the Pan Am 747 with such force that it was propelled into the air only to crash back down in a ball of flame and wreckage. Imagine, if you will, the intensity of the collision. The KLM's undercarriage tore into the Pan Am's upper deck, ripping through the structure like a hot knife through butter. The Pan Am's fuselage was ruptured, spewing jet fuel into the surrounding area. This ignited fuel engulfed both aircraft in an inferno, painting the night sky in an eerie glow that could be seen for miles around. The fire that followed was a monstrous sight. The heat was so intense that it melted the metal bodies of the aircraft, creating a gruesome tableau of twisted metal and smoldering ruins. The air was filled with acid smell of burning fuel and the harsh scent of scorched earth. In the immediate aftermath, the runway was a scene of devastation. Emergency services rushed to the scene, their sirens piercing the night, adding to the cacophony of destruction. Their desperate efforts to control the fire and rescue survivors were hampered by the scale of the disaster and the extensive damage to both aircraft. This was not just a collision, it was an event of such magnitude that it shook the very foundations of aviation. The repercussions were felt not just in the immediate aftermath, but in the years and decades that followed, reshaping the future of air travel. And so began an exhaustive investigation, one that would reveal critical insights into the tragedy of Pan Am Flight 1736. The inquiry was carried out by multiple international aviation agencies, spearheaded by the United States National Transportation Safety Board. They combed through the haunting wreckage, meticulously analyzed flight data, and painstakingly interviewed survivors and the air traffic controllers on duty. Their findings painted a grim picture. It was revealed that the disaster was a result of a series of unfortunate circumstances and errors. Miscommunication between the pilots and air traffic control played a key role, leading to a fatal misunderstanding about whether the runway was clear for takeoff. This, coupled with a limited visibility due to fog, set the stage for the unthinkable. But the investigation didn't stop at identifying the cause. It delved deeper, scrutinizing the underlying factors that allowed such a catastrophic error to occur. It was found that the procedures for communication between the cockpit and control tower were ambiguous, and the protocols for takeoff under foggy conditions were inadequate. The fallout from the investigation was significant. It led to sweeping changes in aviation procedures worldwide. Stricter protocols were implemented for communications between pilots and air traffic control. Clear guidelines were established for takeoff in adverse weather conditions. Yet, the price paid for these lessons was heartbreakingly high. The loss of life was staggering, and the impact on the survivors and the families of those lost was immeasurable. The echoes of Pan Am Flight 1736 still resonate today, a stark reminder of the immense responsibility that comes with the miracle of flight. This unfortunate event became a catalyst for significant improvements in aircraft design, pilot training, and air traffic control procedures, shaping the way we fly today. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of clear communication, the need for precise coordination, and the potential consequences of misunderstandings on the tarmac. Following the incident, the aviation industry took a long, hard look at the design of aircraft. The Boeing 747, the very plane involved in the incident, was re-evaluated. Over the course of its production from the late 60s to just a few years ago, the Queen of the Skies underwent numerous design changes. Some of these were in direct response to the lessons learned from Flight 1736. The focus shifted towards smaller, more fuel-efficient aircraft, reducing the carbon footprint and increasing operational flexibility. The tragedy also brought about a revolution in pilot training. It highlighted the critical need for pilots to have a comprehensive understanding of their aircraft, the airport layout, and the intricacies of air traffic control. Training programs were overhauled, placing greater emphasis on communication skills, decision-making under pressure, and situational awareness. Today, pilots undergo rigorous training, ensuring they are well-equipped to handle any situation that might arise. Air traffic control procedures too underwent major changes post the incident. The need for clear, unambiguous communication between the control tower and the pilots in the cockpit was underscored. The language of aviation became more standardized, reducing the risk of misunderstanding and misinterpretation. In essence, the Pan Am Flight 1736 incident served as a wake-up call to the aviation industry. It led to the implementation of rigorous safety measures and protocols, all aimed at preventing such a tragedy from ever re-recurring.